David Lean. Man, who's David Lean? David Lean
is brought up near London. He was the director who started off as an editor.
And being an editor for years and years, Noel Coward said, you do the editing and make the film too.
The films that he made with Noel Coward, In Which We Serve and Brief Encounter, touch on something extraordinarily British.
When you see the Dickens films he made, Great Expectations and Oliver Twist, they're almost perfect.
River Kwai.
Lean's Bridge on the River Kwai is one of the most perfect movies ever made.
Lawrence of Arabia.
It's impossible not to have been affected by Lawrence of Arabia.
Dr. Zhivago.
Continually appear as among the best films in the history.
Ryan's Daughter, it's a beautiful, beautiful film.
Passage to India just looked so impressive.
David Lean is a grand master of cinema.
I just love movies, and I would like to make good movies.
That's how I would do it.
After the success of his latest film, Passage to India, that won 2 Oscars and gained another 9 nominations, British filmmaker David Lean is looking for a new project.
I want to make something that, if I went to the cinema and wasn't me, I would enjoy watching.
I find it terribly difficult to find a subject to film. I search around, I go into bookshops, look for novels, and I think within 6 feet of me there must be a marvelous film subject, but there never is.
When David was actually doing Empire of the Sun, and Steven Spielberg and Warner's were producing, and he asked me to read Empire of the Sun, which I'd already read. And at the end of it, he said to me, "What did you think? Do you really want me to tell you what I think?"
Yes.
I feel it's got no dramatic arc, and it's got no particularly good ending. Good, he said. That's what I think, and I'm not doing it.
If I take on a movie, I want terribly to do it frightfully well. So therefore, I spend an inordinate amount of time choosing the subject and then working on the script.
We commissioned the University of Cambridge to review which 20th century novel hadn't been filmed.
It's very funny. The film students were asked a question. What would they like me to direct next? And 8 out of 10 said Conrad's Nostromo. Very funny.
Maggie Unsworth and Robert Bolt, for many years, had said, "Please read Nostromo." He had a copy with him in Tahiti, and he started to read it.
In the time of Spanish rule, and for many years afterwards, the town of Sulaco had found an inviolable sanctuary from the temptations of a trading world. In the solemn hush of the deep Golfo Placido, as if within an enormous semicircular and unroofed temple open to the ocean, with its walls of lofty mountains hung with the morning draperies of clouds. On one side of this broad curve in the straight seaboard of the Republic of Costa Rica,
He couldn't get past page 250 because it was location, 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 which to him was easy. That was the easy bit. But where's the story, he said? Where are the characters in this? I can't read it.
It's a true novel, you know. I mean, Conrad, the first 50, 60, 70 pages is just build-up to the story.
I know from my own students that I have to say to them not to worry for the first 100, 200 pages, that they have no idea what's going on. That there will be a point 200 pages in and they suddenly will realize what's happening.
Once you get through that 70 pages, it really moves along, the story of Nostromo.
Nostromo. What a name. What is that?
By the time we got back to the house on the river in Narrow Street, he suddenly said, "This is the most amazing thing. I've now got to the story, past page 250, and it's full of wonderful characters and a wonderful story."
I think part of making a good movie, or the greater part of it, is a good story, which I know is out of fashion, and good characters.
He didn't take his camera for 2 days, which is unusual, you know, for David not to use a camera. He was just completely immersed in Nostromo. So that's how it started, really.
Avanti, yes, that is all he cares for, to be first somewhere, somehow. He'll be showing him to everybody. This is our Nostromo.
I'd just written the stage version of Les Liaisons Dangereuses. So that had opened in London and was very successful. And I just got a call saying, would I go and see him? He had this enormous house on the river near Tower Bridge. And he had an enormous study with a plate glass window behind him and the river, which was quite wide at that point and curving, so it was a very dramatic view. So he sat behind the desk, and I sat in front of him. I was completely terrified. And he said, Nostromo. I said, yes, yes. He said, you want to do it? So it was as simple as that.
The door, all black in the pale war, stood open, as if he had nothing to hide from the world.
I was very nervous the day before, the night before I went to work with him for the first time. I didn't really sleep until very late. And a strange thing happened, which has never happened before or since, which is that in those few hours of sleep, I dreamt the opening of the movie.
Underwater, day. The camera travels down through tranquil depths, past shifting columns of light and silvery fronds of seaweed. After a while, it discerns a curious shape on the ocean floor, dark and indistinct, surmounted by a gleaming white sphere. Gradually, the object on the seabed becomes identifiable. It is a skeleton sitting up, dressed in the rotting remains of a frock coat. 2 lingots of silver protrude, one from each frayed pocket. Not far off lies a tarnished, pearl-handled revolver. The grinning skull seems to look upwards at an air bubble, which we follow on its journey towards the surface of the sea.
He said, oh, that's very good. And which was great because 5 or 6 years that he worked on the script, that was always still the beginning. He never changed the beginning.
Beginnings and endings were the great thing he liked. The beginning of Lawrence is very interesting because the way it starts off with him dying on a motorcycle. That's the sort of beginning of it. Very, very strong entrance of a central character.
Car would come for me at 9 o'clock in the morning every day, except Sundays. It was usually about an hour in the car to the East End where he lived. And then we would work all day until 6, and then the car would bring me back. He was nearly 80 when I went to work with him. He was tremendously energetic. He was very convivial. I would say at least half an hour a day, we were just talk about actors and films and experiences of one sort or another in Hollywood and elsewhere. After the first 4 weeks, where we kind of hashed out the plot, we worked out the structure of the film, David went to Los Angeles and to Mexico with John Box, who was going to design it. He went on a trip which lasted about 4 weeks, I think. And he said to me, "Can you write the script by the time I get back?" And I said, "Well, it's quite I'll try. I'll do the best I can."
We went to Cuba. John Box and Eddie Farley had done a recce and prepared everything. There were no screws available in Cuba at that time. There was no paint. You had to pay extras to film in the film, and it was just a no-no as far as David was concerned. Then came Baja, California.
Él vino en un jet pequeño y nosotros le fuimos a esperar al aeropuerto de Loreto. Buscamos un sitio exótico que tuviera infraestructuras para hacer una película de este tipo, tuviera estudios y hubiera buenas condiciones para el rodaje.
Nostromo es una novela con muchísimos escenarios muy distintos. Hay escenas de montaña, hay escenas de selva, hay escenas de ciudad, hay escenas de costa y hay escenas en las que los barcos juegan un papel importantísimo. Hay escenas multitudinarias, digamos, que hubieran sido dignas de Cecil DeMille.
The city of Sulaco, with its opulent campo and the rich silver mine, lies between the mountains and the plain, at some little distance from its harbor and out of the direct line of sight from the sea.
Loreto fue el sitio donde se iba a centralizar la base para el rodaje de la película, ¿no? Y el montaje de decorados. Tenía unos paisajes muy bonitos, con un mar fantástico.
So he came back after about 4 weeks, and he'd talked to Warner Brothers, and he'd got some interest from them, and he'd also talked to Steven Spielberg, who said that he would be happy to produce the film.
David Lean's influence, I mean, cited by directors over and over again, most notably on somebody like Steven Spielberg.
Lean's Bridge on the River Kwai is a film that I also will see before I direct a picture.
David, Stephen and I sat at David's house. Stephen said to David, I never knew how you cut that wonderful shot in Lawrence of Arabia when the match flared, and then instantly afterwards there was an empty desert and that sound of silence. Lean was absolutely absorbed that Spielberg had that interest in the technical work of how David did that shot.
Technically provoked me to want to know more about how movies are made. I look at that picture as a major miracle. Certainly, Lawrence of Arabia was the film that, set me on my journey, made me go and get a stick and put a duffel on the end of the stick with a bunch of, toothpaste and toothbrush and set off for Hollywood. That was the film that I think, at least, that was the catalyst that got me moving.
So there was mutual respect, high regard for each other's skill.
Certainly you can see in something like Empire of the Sun, with which Lean was associated early on, that Spielberg has that same kind of vision.
Well, David said, I don't want to do Empire of the Sun. Stephen then said to David, would you mind if I did it? And David said, not at all. So Stephen then took both movies, Nostromo and Empire of the Sun, to Warner Brothers and Terry Semel. It was, if I remember correctly, and I'm sure it is correct actually, $30 million for each movie.
With the silver in his hands, he could make terms for himself and his soldiers. The game seemed in his own hands.
Finally, I had a first draft done after 6 weeks and sent it in to him. And 2 or 3 days later, he called and he said he was very pleased with it. But there was a lot of, he thought a lot of work to do.
Nostromo is one of the great novels in the English language. You cannot say it's like Ghostbusters or Raiders of the Lost Ark or anything like that. It's quite original of its time.
It's a wonderful book, but Conrad, very difficult to film. Not very many of Conrad's books have been successfully told. It's very difficult to distill the characters and the intent of Conrad into a short space of time.
I think it must be a very difficult novel to adapt because it's so involved with the techniques of novel writing.
Well, there are elements in it which are very tricky.
Who is the hero of the book? Nostromo is the hero of the book.
There are 5, 6 characters, main characters, 5 definitely.
Who is the villain? Nostromo is really also the villain.
But the real hero of the film is money. The money.
The more precise answer is to say the villain is the money.
It's such a textual novel and has such a use of time shift, metaphor, different perspectives, different voices.
Of course, it's very dark. Of course, it's very pessimistic. And of course, it's very complicated. But I think it's so wonderful. I think it's an absolutely magnificent story for a film.
I had no notion that a place on a seacoast could remain so isolated from the world. Even the revolutions had respected the repose of the place. In Sulaco, they heard only the echoes of the great questions.
I got the book and quite blatantly wrote, underlined in the book, put a pencil line down the scenes that I thought would look wonderful on a screen. What I did was try to join up those scenes I thought would make good movie scenes and write links between them. I write very detailed shooting scripts because I find it very difficult shooting a movie, and I try to have it there as a blueprint. And I try to think of how I imagine it's going to look on the screen and describe it in the script.
I like getting as much of the film on paper as I possibly can.
It was, for me, a tremendous learning time. I learned an enormous amount, you know, about the nuts and bolts of structuring a movie. The storyboard artist was on from the beginning. We'd have paintings up on the wall in his office of various scenes so that we could visualize the scene as we were rewriting it.
I think that if you look back on any film you've seen, you don't remember lines of dialogue, you remember pictures.
When he said to me, Lean, when he said, do you think this should be a cut or a dissolve? I would say to him, well, you're David Lean. Why are you asking me? Up until then, I'd only just been a screenwriter. I'd never really thought in such depths about the camera, about sound, about montage.
editing is one of the, if not the, chief of the tools of my trade.
A thing that he said to me once is always in my mind now when I'm writing scripts. He said, look, a script, because you have complete freedom, it means you have to be even more disciplined. And he said a script should be in no more than 6 or 8 or 10 or maybe 12 chapters. But in each chapter, you cannot let the audience, it's like the audience are holding a rope and they have to go along. You must never let them let go of the rope. You must take them from the beginning of the section to the end of the section in one sort of graceful arc. And he said, and for that reason, the final image of any scene and the first image of the next scene are the most important things, the most important decisions in any movie.
It's like putting a giant jigsaw together. And it's this fitting of the jigsaw together that fascinates me as far as the film's concerned.
Which is, of course, an old editor speaking, but I always think now when I'm writing the last image of this scene, how does it fit with the first image of the next scene? What is the relationship between the two images? And that I got from David.
Personally, I enjoy cutting almost as much as direction, I think. I find it a fascinating job. You write a script or work on a script, and then you get a picture of a certain person in your mind, of course, and then you begin to think what actor could fit into that picture.
David was amazing when he was talking about casting, because he'd always say to me, babe, living or dead, who do you think could play the part, you know?
I think he had physicalities in his mind. He had images in his mind, but he was very open in the sort of people that you could bring in to meet him. He would tell you very quickly if he didn't think somebody was right, but he didn't limit you in any way.
He'd never pick up a telephone and say, it would have been somebody else who said, you ought to see her. She's perfect for the part.
We interviewed a lot of people. I mean, Tony Hopkins at one time was talked about, Jeremy Irons. And I don't know, a lot of people turned it down. And I don't understand why, but said no, that they didn't feel. I don't know whether it was the commitment, the length of time that they would be involved in it, but there were quite a few people that said no.
When David was reading Nostromo, he turned around one day and he said, it's got to be Marlon.
If I go to a movie, I'm sort of looking at the screen, and there's the audience, and there's the screen, and if a really good scene comes up or a really good actor comes up, gradually everything disappears, and just the focus goes right down onto the screen. Brando, you never know quite which way that cat's going to jump, do you? No, I can't really talk about Brando, except I think he's highly intelligent.
He called Marlon, and sadly, he was sick. He couldn't do it because he'd had a stroke at the time. Otherwise, I think he would have done. But he wrote the most wonderful letter to David. You are the last of a breed, David. I don't want to sound maudlin in my poor praise, but I was simply delighted with the story.
David always wanted to have somebody fairly unknown for the part of Nostromo. He liked that. I mean, if you think of a lot of his films, he would, O'Toole hadn't done anything much, Omar Sharif.
He didn't know anything about me. He decided that he needed an actor who is a real Arab. He said to me, I looked at all the photographs of all the Arab actors. And he looked at all the photographs and he turned the pages like this and he said, if this boy, I wasn't a boy, I was 30 years old. If this boy can speak English, bring him here to play the part. He didn't know if I spoke English or not. It so happened that the coincidence, he liked my photograph and I spoke English, which is something miraculous for me. And otherwise, I would have stayed in Egypt all my life. I would never have had a career in America and anywhere else.
Truly, for some men, nothing is written unless they write it.
He really liked discovering a new star.
It was Joyce, actually, that put the idea of Cora first to David. And what David thought was that he would be the new Omar Sharif.
At the time I was doing theater, I was with Peter Brook's company, and there was a very renowned casting director called Patsy Pollock, who saw the show in Paris. And she was a good friend of Joyce Galley, who was the official casting director for Nostromo. And so she talked to Joyce, and Joyce came to Paris.
I went over to Paris and met him and also saw the play, which was amazing. And then I went out for dinner with Georges.
She was still checking me out, across the table.
He said to me, what do you think? What are the qualities you think Nostromo should have? And I said, well, he's a man of the people, but I think he would have been very flamboyant.
At the time, I had no idea what flamboyant was. I was wondering, well, what do you mean flamboyant?
I think it was very late. We'd had a few glasses of wine.
We got out.
It's quite difficult getting taxis in Paris.
Taxis on the Boulevard Saint-Germain were passing, not stopping. It was very difficult. We were in the rain.
Suddenly, George just took off up the street like a knight.
I just, almost grabbed a taxi, stopped him, forced him to stop, say, hey, take this lady. And so Joyce went,
that's flamboyant.
So I think catching that taxi was probably what got me an appointment, a meeting with David Lean.
We came back and, I talked to David about it. And then it was decided to do a screen test with him.
Test 6, take 1. Inboard. I suppose that all of us are wonderful actors in our bath. But as soon as you have one of these horrible instruments pointing at you, or as soon as you're on the stage, you start to become paralyzed.
All right, quiet. Here we go, then. Off we go.
And it's half the director's job is taking the nerves out of actors.
All right, I'll do it.
Acting for the cinema is purely a question of thought.
Test 7, take 2.
If you see an amateur stage show, people pull faces. Acting is not pulling faces, it's thinking.
All right, I'll do it.
On the screen, even in a great big long shot, where the screen's that size and the actor's that size and he's walking away, if he's not thinking right, there'll be something wrong with his walk. I don't know how it happens, but it does.
Slate 8, take 2.
Right, going when you like.
And an actor's got to know what he's thinking every moment during the scene.
Good. I thought it was the kind of adventure that might appeal to you.
You don't seem to understand, senor. What you are offering is to infect me with a fatal disease.
What do you mean?
Do I have to explain? We must rendezvous with some steamer out beyond the Gulf. We may starve before we find it, and to land anywhere along the coast with such a cargo of silver is to run your heart against the point of a knife.
We all agreed you were the only man for the job.
And so I
Well, I'm watching it a combination of my son, my daughter, who are that age today. I feel like I'm my own father. But also, there was another father to this guy, and that was David Lean.
I loved him. He was my father. I was his son.
See?
He made me as a decent actor, and he made me successful in the world. David Lean did that for me. Therefore, I cannot judge who is better than this. For me, this is God. This was God for me, David Lean.
It was, It was like going to a battle, and I was there with a great general. I felt that I could trust that guy. I could get killed for him.
What you are offering is to infect me with a fatal disease.
We sat together and he said, look, do what you want to do. If I see something that's not so good, I will let you know, but you do what you think you have to do.
I guess I was intimidated by David Lean as a person, but as a... on the set, even though he was really awesome to watch and to listen to, he was not intimidating. Now we were on the same side. We were... that was not intimidating. We were focusing on the same thing. We were working for the same goal. And if you are intimidated at that moment, then you cannot do anything. You got to believe in yourself. You got to feel that you got what it takes, and you're gonna give what is asked from you and more.
And see, no wind, not even a breath of wind.
Cut it, fine. Cut.
David was not really interested in speed. He was interested in getting everything perfect.
He was obsessively interested in excellence, absolutely excellence, in everything, rather than it will do.
Every single scene, he said, had to be the most important scene in the film. He treated every scene, every sequence, as the most important.
Everything he wanted, everything he was doing was looking for perfection, even those screen tests. David thought that it went very well, but a couple of days later, he called, or I got a call from Joyce saying we had to do it again.
The stories that I'd heard about David sort of suddenly came into place. The trouble with it was that when we went to see not the rushes, but they edited the thing together, David couldn't actually look at any of the actors because he disliked the lighting so much, and he said he couldn't see a bloody thing.
Getting actors ready to do a scene is rather like lining up horses at a tape, and when they're keyed up to a certain point, boom, down goes the tape, up they go and off they go. And if the camera's not ready or the sound breaks down, as it very often does, well, that's the end of the game.
It was the light, it was David Watkins, who had recently gotten an Oscar for Out of Africa. David Watkins, he said, he's such a genius, but what he did with the lights doesn't suit me, Only a genius would do such a blunder.
I don't know what we did after that. We all just disappeared because he was a bit cross.
That was so exciting to see him and to see the difference between the David that I had met, sitting back and having tea and talking, and the David who was like a captain on a ship, and in a crucial passage, he was watching everything like an eagle. But he was living. You could see that he was 100%. And it was very inspiring to see him, to see that transformation, transfiguration. David didn't want to send to Spielberg something that he was not completely agreeing with in all respects. We had to do it again with someone else.
13, take 2, board and end.
He also screen tested Alan Rickman.
Test 9, take 1.
Who had never made a film before. but who Lean had gone to see in Les Liaisons Dangereuses.
Well?
Lean had actually gone to the theatre and watched the play and liked Alan and then tested him and said to me, this man has a very good career in film. He said, your friend is wonderful.
I thought it was the kind of adventure that would appeal to you.
And we tested a lot of people. I remember Tilda Swinton.
Test 4, take 2. Run up the generators and go when you like. Up.
This is not a day for paying calls, Doctor.
A number of people who later on became very well known.
4. 2.
So the second test was sent to Spielberg, and a couple of days later I got directly from David Lean the answer that it was all thumbs up. Spielberg liked the test, liked me, and I was on board, and Warner Brothers signed me, took an option for like 3 months. It was like everything was incredible. Everything was happening.
David said to him, you know, George, you'll have to go to the gym. You'll have to do something because Nostromo, you know, is muscly and...
I had said to David that if I do get the part, I was gonna build myself the body of Capataz de Cargadores, of the captain of the dockers.
Handsome, robust and supple, he threw back his head, flung his arms open, and stretched himself with a slow twist of the waist. Then, in the suddenly steadied glance fixed upon nothing from under a thoughtful frown, appeared the man.
I went to a gym and I started going practically every day. And I started preparing the role. Exterior beach of the Great Isabel, day for night. The dark outlines of the gnarled tree and the grass against the moonlit sea. In the distance, Nostromo rowing his dinghy towards the shore.
At a certain point, David went with the first draft, which was by now to his satisfaction, and went back to Los Angeles to show it to Spielberg and Warner Brothers.
And I guess that's when the falling out started.
He was very annoyed when he came back because Spielberg had given him some notes, which he was very, very angry about. He said to me, who does he think he is? I said, well, he thinks he's the producer, and he is the producer. And he said, yes, but I mean, I don't interfere with his films.
He criticized the script, and David didn't like that.
Spielberg was very excited to work with Lean, and he was doing his job. You know, he was the executive producer, so he started making notes. All those notes were very respectful and very praising the work, but still, it was a lot of notes, and David did not expect that. He was caught off guard because the script at that time was not final. So he felt that he was criticized for something that was just a work in progress, and he didn't feel that was not fair.
So that made the relationship between the two, or between David and Spielberg, strained.
That created, in relation to Nostromo, a degree of tension. And with the benefit of hindsight, it would have been better perhaps not to have involved someone of Stephen's stature alongside David in relation to a major film. Two players of that stature weren't ever really going to work, in a sense.
At that point, He was writing the script, David, and came home, continued to write the script. And it became quite clear that David was taking much longer over the script than anyone wanted, and that Stephen had started to shoot Empire of the Sun.
Warner's saw that it was not going to be the biggest blockbuster of Spielberg. Spielberg was going over budget.
Warner Brothers had said they would put up half the money for the film, and he couldn't understand why. It was an immensely expensive film. He couldn't understand why they weren't putting up all the money.
Whether Stephen's movie went over the budget of 30 because the two were 60 and had taken part of that budget, it remains not very clear. But the phone call came that Warners were not going to do Nostromo.
The falling out was official very soon.
Then came the most terrible trauma with David because he was in a terrible mood about it, as you can imagine. And I thought he was going to just drop everything.
The darkness of the sky had descended to the line of the horizon, enveloping the whole gulf. It was impossible for him to do anything, since there was no one to trust. The treasure would be lost, probably.
Finally, between Maggie Unsworth and myself and probably Tony Reeves, you know, his lawyer, we said, you know, another producer, of course, will do it. But then who? One night, there was a dinner with Kurosawa, the director that David really, really admired. I was sitting next to Serge Silverman. Serge Silverman, of course, I knew by then had directed Buñuel and, you know, done several very successful movies. And at the end of that dinner, he just happened to say to me, Sandra, if there's anything, any time for David that I can do for him, tell him to call me. You couldn't say to David, here's a producer, call him. You had to make him think it was his idea, not mine or anybody else's. So you had to very gently sow a seed. And if he picked it up, you were lucky. Sometimes he didn't. But I just persevered very quietly, you know, leaving it for a few days. And then one day he said to me, okay, babe, get him on the phone for me.
I thought, I'm going to ring up Silverman, and that's what I did, because he's backed some very strange pictures. He backed Kurosawa, and he backed Buñuel. Right. So I thought maybe he'll back me, and he said I will.
After that phone call from David, he came over to London in 24 hours, and that's how it started.
And then Serge Silverman got involved, and then that became a very different half to the story.
At this point, it became urgent for me to go to work on Dangerous Liaison, because we had heard that Milos Forman was also preparing his version, and we therefore felt we needed to get our film out first. So I said to him, in a month's time, I need to go and write Dangerous Liaison, and I'll hopefully be able to come back after 3 months and work with you again. But he wasn't very pleased about that. While I was away working on Liaison, I called him one day from Paris, from the Joinville studios. And he said, oh, I've decided to go on with Robert.
So that was the end of Christopher's script, unfortunately. David was a Quaker, and his parents were very strict Quakers. And you probably know in a Quaker meeting there are deathly silences, there's no word at all. So David's silences would be terrible. Christopher would come in very taut and probably want a glass of wine or something, which David didn't like during the day. If things were going well, normal conversation over lunch. If things weren't, you could actually hear the clink of knives and forks on the plate and the footsteps on the stone floor and the wood floor, and that was all the sound we heard. So it was very tough for Christopher, and I felt very sorry for him. At the same time, I knew David's misgivings, you know, that he was very nervous himself. Probably more nervous than Christopher, but it came over in a very cold, aloof way. To be truthful, in one way he was relieved, because he couldn't come to terms with Christopher not having the vision that he had. And of course Christopher couldn't have that vision. Nobody could. But people that knew David could work it out.
He didn't like people very much. David, first love was films. The second was Rolls Royce. And the third was women.
As a man, he was very difficult. I think he had 6 marriages.
I expected him to be very controlling, which he was to a certain extent. But when I lived with him and understood him much more, he was a very kind man, generous man, prone to moods, but only because of movies. If you went away on holiday with him, he was completely relaxed and different. But during that making of a movie, you had to sort of blend with it all the time.
I learned an enormous amount from him, and I liked working with him very much. But after 6 months, I thought we had the script in a good place. And after 9 months, I thought we had the script in a really good place. And then I became anxious because he sort of kept wanting to unpick everything and start again all the time. And so I began to be frightened that he didn't really want to make the film, that he just wanted to go on working on the film.
For him, a film is something that he doesn't want it to end. When we used to shoot films with David Lean, it lasted forever.
He would never stop until he got exactly what he written down on the page.
That's why he took an enormous amount of time to get the script written, and the shots therein were there so that it would be shot exactly to what was already encapsulated in his brain.
His history is that that's how you make a David Lean film.
I think that is what being a director is. He's encouraging a talent, encouraging things that he saw in the negative in his mind when he was doing the script, and suppressing things that seem to go against it. And so in that sort of way, I'm a kind of gentle dictator.
He lived in his own cocoon. He was comfortable with that. He wasn't making films to make money in order to race motor cars or have expensive aeroplanes, this sort of thing. He just wanted to make films. All the time, he was thinking about a scene, a script. He was obsessive, completely absorbed with filmmaking.
It's a pretty killing job. I haven't had a Sunday off, for instance, for, well, as long as I can remember. I go into the cutting rooms when the unit have a Sunday off, and it's pretty tough, but I get very excited by making a movie, and I suppose it's a kind of nervous energy. I'm tired now, as I said to you before, but I suppose the nerve of that infernal machine wakes me up.
Nostromo does not aspire to be a leader in a personal game. He does not want to raise himself above the mass. The heroes of the world have been feared and admired. What more could he want?
As soon as Christopher Hampton left Nostromo to do his film, Dangerous Liaisons, David went to see Robert Bolt, his old collaborator on Lawrence and Zhivago and Ryan's Daughter.
Robert Bolt had recovered from a stroke that he had had a few years ago, and David Lean wanted to resume his friendship and his partnership.
David Lean wanted to work with the same group of people, Robert Bolt as the scriptwriter, Eddie Fowley, Freddie Young, all these people who were consummate professionals and very skilled at what they did, and David Lean turned to them time and time again for new film projects.
I remember I used to go, when I was young, on a lot of cruises, and they lasted about 2 weeks, and at the end of them, it was rather sad because I made all sorts of friendships and so forth and so on. There was a last farewell dinner, etc., etc. Rather sad. It's exactly the same with making a film, but my cruise lasts a year, and I work day in, day out with these technicians who obviously I've become very fond of. We work very, very close together.
I didn't get a sense that he had old friends that he was seeing regularly. His friends were people he was working with because, you know, his life was his work.
You are the only friend I have. And he turned around and he said, I never dreamed.
There were a lot of things that I had soaked in from both the scenario of Christopher Hampton and David Lean and the actual novel of Conrad. And David Lean very generously invited me for 2 days to his house. 2 days, I had a masterclass with Robert Bolt and David Lean. And man, it was a bloody masterclass. It was incredible. It was incredible how much I learned about cinema at that moment.
We work so well because I'm first and foremost interested in a story, the characters, and the way I'm going to put it up there on the screen, the pictures I'm going to flip up. And Robert, of course, is thinking in a much more interior way.
They started working at another level, making really that scenario, making it a shooting script. For example, there's a scene which is almost the expositional scene of Nostromo, where he goes to a fiesta. It's a great scene, but there's a lot of dialogue in Conrad. And there was only like 3 lines of dialogue in the final script. And I said, why, you know, all those lines are so great. And David said to Robert Bolt, Robert, show him. And Robert had a stroke. He was really handicapped and couldn't move one side and had half the side really handicapped. And he said, oh, David, yes, show him. Come on, David, I can. Go ahead. Oh, and he got up, you know, and you know, just did those lines for me to see that it was so much stronger with the minimum lines. And I went, okay, I get it.
He thinks that the half of the actor will explain anything. I don't.
I'm always trying to get long, silent sequences in my films, and I'm very pleased when we have only just a line here or a line there, and the picture tells the story.
Of course, I will rewrite it about 4 times before we are both satisfied with it. And of course, it is David who must be satisfied with it, because if he is not satisfied, he doesn't shoot it.
They'd discuss everything, a whole day. And then Robert would go away and come back with notes, and David would just say, nearly there, Robert, but not quite. Oh, said Robert. Okay. And he'd go away again and come back. And that's how they worked.
We have a very free relationship together, in work particularly. You know, we can say anything and we spark off each other, which is very exciting. Well, it was very funny because, you see, Robert was a schoolmaster. You know, he was English master at Millfield. Very posh school. And being an intellectual, I was absolutely terrified of him.
David had a great fear of what he called highbrows. Highbrow is a person who had been to university and was a word man. Very grateful he was for word men like Robert, who was a teacher, and Christopher, because David was a visual man and not a word man. At the same time, he had a great fear of this. When he was a child, he kept getting reports from school that David's a dud, David daydreams, David... So he thought he was very stupid. And that went through his whole life.
I was absolutely hopeless at school and wasn't allowed to go to the cinema. It was magic to me, and if you knew what the London suburbs were like, you would understand. It was a very, very grey, and the movies were a journey into another world. And because I suppose I was so overawed by the movies, I thought they were so wonderful, literally a dream world, I never thought one could go into it.
And life went on with this incredible situation of having always a new starting date. For me, it was very difficult because I had to choose my projects and make sure that I would be finished when the start date was announced. The other very unpleasant thing was that I had to keep going to the gym. I literally went around the world, Australia, Japan, America, East Coast, West Coast, Italy. We went all over the world, and I always had to find a gym. And those gyms that I could find were not like the 5-star gyms. They were really like the Rocky Balboa kind of joints, really rusty, and it was really, really interesting. But still, the pain was the pain. The having to go to the gym when you're tired and when you would like to read a book or when you'd like to do something else or visit the country. That was a discipline, and it was lasting on and on and on. And still, I just owed it to myself and to David Lean and to Nostromo, and I was getting more and more inhabited by the story, by the character, and I thought it was going to be a beautiful film.
Nostromo could not imagine himself dead. He was possessed too strongly by the sense of his own existence, a thing of infinite duration in its changes, to grasp the notion of finality. The earth goes on forever.
Funding for the film in those days required completion guarantees to the financiers, so that the completion guarantors would guarantee to the financiers that the film would be made, and that it would be made on time, and it would be made within the budget.
I think the budget at that point went up to about 48 million. We had BBC, TriStar, Columbia TriStar, and then a syndicate, which Serge found and put together, which was amazing.
Esta película era de tal envergadura que había momentos que John Box iba a ocupar más de la zona de Niza, mientras yo me iba a encargar de la construcción de decorados y diseñado en España, ¿no?
Nostromo takes place in an imaginary South American republic. And so, nothing better than to have Spain.
In Mexico, which is where they were originally going to shoot, they had a lot of problems with the unions, and it was going to be very expensive anyway. So they decided to film here in Almería.
Yo me movilicé y empecé a llamar a todos los hoteles de Almería, los más importantes de la época. Hicimos la entrevista y me propuso que le acompañara al día siguiente, aquí donde estamos en este momento, que estaba localizando pues, escenarios para la película, ¿no?
People here in Almería have always been very, very good to me. I've always got permissions to do anything and everything.
Lawrence of Arabia was one of the first major films that was made here, and it set the ball rolling for many other productions. Eddie Fowley liked it. Eddie liked it so much that he decided to come to live here. Eddie was convinced that this would be an ideal spot to make this film.
I learned to stand to one side and watch him and read him. And I'd anticipate him. And if he wanted a butterfly, I'd got a butterfly standing by.
Eddie got involved in all aspects of production, and one of these was this. He wasn't totally convinced with the script in Nostromo.
I'm going to do the whole story of Nostromo right through as an idea.
And he felt that the film should begin with Nostromo's funeral.
It is night, and the mouth and lower part of a big bell fills the screen.
Hay casos de realizadores, digamos más o menos de su edad actual, que están teniendo dificultades por parte de las compañías de seguros y de las productoras de financiarles sus películas, como puede ser Billy Wilder, por ejemplo.
Not true of Billy Wilder, and it certainly wasn't true of John Huston, who died, and George Cukor. They supported them all when they were over 80. They meant that production company may have to pay a bit more, but they give you a big physical examination, and they don't give you insurance if you're not very fit.
There's always a question when a director gets to a certain age, or indeed any artist gets to a certain age, and they've had a wonderful early and mid-period output, as to whether or not they should be attempting something later on. And people will always say, well, maybe it was too late. There are, in cinema, there are tremendous examples of directors like Billy Wilder or Sidney Lumet, who were doing tremendous work later on. So I don't think the age itself is necessarily any barrier to it, though clearly it's a tiring business being a director, and once you get out on location, and a potentially exhausting business. It's all down to the quality of the ideas and the vision.
The fact that David Lean was over 80 years old all of a sudden made him he had to have an insurance for like $4 million. $4 fucking million. So that, was creating problems in financing the film.
Well, you always have the pressure of money behind you, because making a film is a very expensive business.
He needed a producer, but he hated the producers. He hated them. He didn't want them to be near him, to come and talk to him, to give him any advice, tell him do this or don't do that. He hated that.
He had a very bad relationship with Sam Spiegel, really bad, and a very bad relationship with Serge. However, Serge was a strong, powerful, extraordinary man, and I liked him very much, Serge. He was very small. He had survived Auschwitz. That says a lot about the tenacity of somebody.
Serge had a passion for a producer, him being a producer of a David Lead film, and such a large project as it was. He was highly motivated by it, but he and David were really, although they were of the same generation, chalk and cheese. Serge was hands-on. David really came from, leave it to me, just find enough money for me to do what I need to do.
He worked with a man called Uli Pickard, who was the sort of money man. And it was like they had a vice around everybody. Everything was so restricted, so controlled, so it has to be like this, it has to be like this, they have to be French, we have to do it, no, we can't have this, no, we can't have that. It was horrible.
Serge, instead of sowing a seed to actors or that he would have preferred, just opposed it. And of course, then ensued the most terrible arguments between the two. So this was ongoing all the time, all the time, all the time.
It was so hard for David to have to deal with all this. I think Sandra, his wife, was wonderful and helped enormously in bridging situations.
I would be pig in the middle. And really what they needed was a line producer. I was being like a line producer between them, between like an arbitrator between the two. And it was a very difficult position for me at the time.
There's a fantastic Greek actress called Irini Papas. I met her with Serge, and she was fabulous. She'd had to take a pill or something it was something very, very small. We go back and talk to David, and he says, Serge says to David, oh, we met Irene. She is terrible ill. She is terrible ill. And I said, she's not. I said, why do you say that? Oh, she has to take these pills and blah, blah. I said, but she looked amazing. I said, He didn't want her.
David wanted Irene Papas and he wanted Isabella Rossellini.
Isabella Rossellini came for an interview by herself. It was unfortunate because she came in sort of tight jeans and a tightish jumper or whatever, and the second she walked through the door, there was no chance whatsoever that she could play the part.
I think Christophe Lambert was going to play Decoux, and then evidently Dennis Quaid.
Nostromo tasted the dust and ashes of the fruit of life into which he had bitten deeply in his hunger for praise. Without removing his head from between his fists, he tried to mutter a curse upon the selfishness of the rich.
Columbia TriStar was joining the co-production. I was so elated. I thought, all right, that is now, we're in the last stretch. The film is going to happen. Little did I know that Mike Medavoy, the head of Columbia TriStar, didn't have any intention of not having a box office star in the lead role of Nostromo. When I learned that, I wasn't so happy, but I also got confirmation that David Lean was not giving up on me, and pretty soon he came up with the idea of making another screen test and proving to Mike Medavoy that he was right about his choice of casting. I was playing The Tempest here in the Bouffe du Nord. So I let them know that I could only be free on a Monday and to organize that screen test. A little later, they showed their cards and, started showing their cards by saying, the only time we can have a screen test where everybody is free, the cinematographer and everyone, that is on a Wednesday. On a Wednesday? That's impossible. I let David Lean and everyone know that it was not possible. And in the meantime, Peter Brook heard about it. And he knew, all these years I had been preparing for this film. And he did something that I will be grateful for forever, if I need to be grateful for that, if I'm already grateful for the day I met him. And so he gathered the company and he said, this is what we're going to do. You are going to double up on this role. You will play this role, and you are going to play Georges' role, and Georges is going to go to Nice and do the screen test. That meant a week of rehearsals for everyone. And I was so moved by that. I called the production, I told them, it's okay, I'll be there on that Wednesday. And a couple of days later, I was here in this cafe. I was, between the warm-up and the show, I was eating something, and a telephone call came from me, and it was David Lean. I could hardly recognize his voice. His voice was distorted from his illness and probably emotion. And he said, my boy, I'm very sorry, we are not going to do the screen test. They want an American star. That's all he told me. I said, thank you, David. Thank you for having been so faithful.
You don't seem to understand, senor. What you are offering is to infect me with a fatal disease.
I thought that he would have carried the part amazingly well, absolutely amazingly well.
George had invested years of his life into this part of building his body up, just total commitment to it. And then he said, no, we've got to have an American star or something for that part. Just everything just started to disintegrate.
Everything was ready to go in Spain. Everything. And then we had to get David home because he suddenly developed tonsillitis, and the French diagnosed it as angine.
He was ill, and so the insurance company would only agree to let him make the film if he had a backup, a standby director.
It's not unusual in the film industry for there to be a standby director in case David was ill in the middle of the last scene or the last month or whatever.
Guy Hamilton stepped in
David said, I think Hugh would be very good for me. I agreed to do it in order to observe him.
There isn't anybody that can stand in for David Lean. I mean, it's a joke in itself.
David was very troubled by that because a David Lean film is a David Lean film. And he was bothered that at one extreme, something would happen to him to prevent directing anything after the first week. And it would still be called a David Lean film, directed by.
I just think he put a stranglehold on David. I mean, of course I can't say this. I can't say he caused his illness, but I certainly think he didn't help.
It's unfortunate that the film wasn't funded by a studio. One of the two studios, Columbia or Warner Brothers, who'd made fortunes out of Lawrence of Arabia, Zhivago, Kwai, and they could have taken a view in a way that an independent producer couldn't.
I terribly miss, we all miss, I think, somebody like Irving Thalberg. He had a foot in both camps. He understood us people, and he understood the money people. He said, the studio has made a lot of money, and they could afford to lose some. I think the time has come where the money people can afford to lose a little money, taking risks.
He wasn't well at all during that time. Really, he needed a wheelchair. But there was no way we were going to show the public that he needed a wheelchair. A, because he was doing a film, hopefully, and B, because of his pride. We spent a lot of time in the house in the south of France. And he was sitting there one day, not feeling very well. I took off his glasses and folded his arms, which he sat very often like that. Not like that, but like that. I thought, uh-oh, something's coming. Babe, I said, yes, I love this house. I want to be here, and I want to shoot the movie in Victorine Studios. And I thought, how's Serge going to take this? You know? Because it was much more expensive, as you can imagine. But Serge, I must say, you know, was so good about it. And he said, if that's what you want, David, we will do it in Victorine Studios. And that was the last instruction he gave to Serge, I remember. I got him on a plane, and we had to actually get a chairlift up into the plane because he was by that time quite weak. And got him back to London, and it was snowing, I remember, hard. And I called the doctor, and they diagnosed that it was a big tumor between the tongue and the tonsil. So that was really, I think, the end of the impossible dream, because he thought he just couldn't make it. He just didn't have the energy. He just willed himself to go. He just didn't want to continue unless he could make a movie. And I said, you know, darling, you're a living legend. Come on, you're going to make this movie. You know, this is going to be big, and you said it's going to be bigger than Lawrence of Arabia, and it will be. He said, you know, that's really sweet of you, babe. But, you know something? I think I'm a near miss.
As I expect you've already heard, Sir David Lean, probably the most distinguished of all British filmmakers, died today at the age of 83.
David died in the April, and then the memorial was in the October.
In St. Paul's Cathedral, with all the people who had been significant in his life.
Peter O'Toole read wonderful piece. Omar, I got involved with 7 Pillars of Wisdom. His son and Maggie, Unsworth, Hugh.
His wife, his widow, asked me to carry his Directors Guild Awards.
Robert Bolt stood up at St. Paul's Cathedral, and all he said was, he was my friend. And I thought that was the most touching of all. It was, in the whole of the cathedral, just, he was my friend.
And they asked me to read the first pages and the last pages of Nostromo. So there were a lot of speeches, and at some point it was my turn, and I made it sound. I just read it for everyone to hear it. That was very moving. Exterior, Plaza Mayor, night. Nostromo is being carried across the square. Bells start to peal, echoing over the town. Torches have appeared, all centered on Nostromo. Hands reach up to touch him, his name being called. Nostromo, Nostromo. Triumphant, victorious. Nostromo is carried aloft into the cathedral, surrounded by torches and candles, like a firefly, burning. Dissolve, sunlight, the hiding place of the treasure, the waving grass, the flowers, the gnarled tree, and the butterflies. The end titles roll up over them.
He died before, really, I had too much time. It was about 6, 7 years, so it was short. But a wonderful short. So that was good. But I really and truly wish he'd made Nostromo. I wish it was in... I was powerless, you know, but I really, really wanted him. I thought, if I can get him to make that movie, he'll get over his sickness. That was what I had in my head. That if I could find somehow to get him, to get the strength back, and for him to make the movie, the sickness would go. And that's stupidly how I thought, but it never worked out at all.
Nostromo, lifting his eyes up to the sky, muttered, "I'm not dead yet."
What is at the core of all of David Lean's films is the question of respect, the respect you get from others, and the self-respect or the self-esteem, the conflict that exists between the stakes that you put for yourself, like in Lawrence or Great Expectations, the limits that you think you cannot go over, and how you surpass them, and Nostromo is a perfect playground for him.
Noel Coward once said to me in our early days, "My dear, always come out of another hole." Now, he said a lot of other things, but I found myself thinking that nearly everything he told me and everything I learned in those early days seems to be contradicted today. We don't come out of any more new holes. We try to go back, and we come out of the old holes, parts 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I think it's terribly, terribly sad.
What a different world it was, the world of David, when he was making his films.
The style of films today is realism. It's realism. In the old times, in the times of David, times of all these people, Orson Welles, you have also something which is magical, which is not just reality.
I realize more and more that reality on the screen, which used to be the thing to aim at, is a sort of bore. I don't mean that the audience should sit there and say, oh, that's unreal. But movies are a kind of dream, aren't they? And I think they should have an unreal edge to them. And that's what I try to do.
We live in an age that's no longer certain in that way, and that kind of very assured storytelling, and not to mention sort of the budgets and the scope and the ambition for sort of real action as opposed to virtual computer effects cinema. I don't think you would any longer find the funding or the willingness, or indeed perhaps the patience of an audience to sit through that. But of its time, it's superb.
This business lives on creative pathfinders, and there are a whole lot of you here. We're in terrible danger. I think there are some wonderful new film makers coming up now. They are going to be our future. Please, you chaps in the money department, remember what they are.
Well, that's the history of cinema. It goes on different, and hopefully we get to carry on the legacy of David.
I love putting images up on the screen. I get a tremendous kick of seeing a sequence cut. I'm in the middle of it now, putting music to a film, getting the dialogue, balance right. I find it immensely exciting. It's been my life.